All right, folks, Jeff from Dead Drift Consulting here. I'm here to talk about, again, revisiting arrows. Arrows are kind of one of my little passionate things that I like to kind of build and tinker with, and I'm constantly playing with one combination or another, regardless of whether or not that change makes an actual difference in how the arrow flies. Okay, and I say that because I'm mildly OCD about this whole thing, and I tend to tinker to the point of like where it almost becomes ridiculous. And yeah, it's a little expensive and it's time consuming, but the benefit of it is, in the end, I know firsthand. I have a firsthand experience or a firsthand account of what this product does or that product does or what I find in it, because that obsession and that obsessive compulsive thing also translates into how my bow is tuned, the consistency of my release form technique when I'm shooting. So I pay attention to all those little details, which tends to eliminate variables and then boil it down to what did that specific change do for me, positive or negative. So anyways, generally every season I go through this process and I build a different set of arrows. I start tinkering in the wintertime, it goes into the summer, I finalize sometime around July, and then I stick with that and shoot that exclusively through August and into September or into the hunting season, whichever month that falls in. So last year, as kind of a recap, I think I covered this in a separate video prior to this. Last year I was shooting the Black Eagle X Impact shaft, which is a very lightweight, thin-walled shaft, 8.2 grains per inch, I believe, something like that, which boosts my speed, increases my FOC, but at the cost of durability. And that is the primary reason, the singular reason why I got away from them, because I was experiencing some failures just in regular everyday shooting into foam targets. And then I suppose, a failure on an animal, if it breaks after it penetrates and gets to where it needs to get, then it's still a success, because arrows under those circumstances are expendable. However, I don't want to break them in practice. I mean, I know there are times when it happens, but just shooting into foam shouldn't create stress cracks or stress fractures or broken points or whatever. Anyway, I'm not going to get into it, because this is not a badmouth Black Eagle. That shaft is an outstanding shaft. It performs very, very well. But when it comes to durability, that's where the sacrifice is, right? There's a compromise in everything. So this year I went to the Day 6 HD shaft. Now Day 6 is still a micro diameter shaft with regard to its interior dimension. The interior diameter of the Day 6 shaft is still a .166. So you have to shoot deep 6 broadheads if you're staying with standard. If you're sticking with anything but the Valkyrie system. Over a year ago, I went to the Valkyrie system, so that wasn't an issue. But it does not meet the nano diameter shaft requirement when you're talking about the outside diameter. Okay, these are significantly larger than a true 4mm shaft, because the wall thickness is considerably thicker, considerably larger. So with the Day 6 shafts and that heavy wall construction, you wind up with a very durable shaft. I think at this point, I don't know, I say this not having tried every shaft on the market, so really take it for what it's worth, but in my experience, or from what I've seen, about the only thing that can compare to the Day 6 HD shaft at the moment is in Easton Axis. Very durable shafts, very popular. I think at Ross Outdoors, where I work part-time 1 day a week, those are probably the most common shafts, arrows that we build, or shafts that we sell for guys to build. So at any rate, the Day 6 HD shaft. So the Black Eagle X Impact, I think, comes in at about 8.2 grains per inch. This, maybe it's 8.5 grains per inch. This comes in at 11.2 grains per inch. So the Day 6 shafts are considerably heavier, almost a full 3 grains heavier than the X Impact from Black Eagle. What does that mean? Well, you get a heavier overall weight on your arrow. It's more difficult to achieve higher FOC if that's the number you're chasing. It's a function of that thick-walled construction. That's why it weighs so much. That's why the axis weighs so much, because it's a thicker-walled construction, and they've got some different materials in there that make it strong and durable. You get a lot. You have an enormous increase in momentum and kinetic energy, but remember, both of those equations also include velocity. Velocity to varying degrees. Kinetic energy favors velocity, momentum favors weight. So for me, and I mean, yes, it's the current trend, but this has always been the case for, I don't know how long I've been chasing this perfect arrow thing. Momentum has always, in my book, has always been a higher priority than kinetic energy. And both of those numbers are still a higher priority than absolute speed. Velocity is definitely part of the equation. It has to be. But it's not my number one thing. When guys are saying like my baseline, my floor essentially for how fast I want to shoot is 300 feet per second, I don't even know what that's like, because I've never owned a bow capable of that, nor have I ever built an arrow that allowed the bow I have to be capable of that. So I've never shot at 300 feet per second. I don't know what that's like. For me, it's a win if I'm at 260 plus. Okay, so with that said, the day 6 shaft that I cut and shot and hunted with in September for my elk hunt was moving at a blazing 268 feet per second, a 540 grain arrow at about 17% FOC. Not a bad combination. However, you know, there's a point of diminishing. I mean, there's a point at which you have to accept the consequences of lower velocity. And quite honestly, I'd rather be faster than 268. So this year, this coming year, going into the new year and into 2020, I'm still going to retain the capabilities of a heavier, slow shaft in the day 6 arrow. But I am also currently experimenting with and been very, very satisfied and happy with the Easton ProComp shaft. Now, I know what you're thinking. What the hell is that? Maybe right now, if you know what it is, or after the fact, after this video, maybe you look it up. These are expensive fucking shafts, man. These are not cheap. This increase in performance is not. So it's an inverse relationship, right? Lighter equals more money. Faster equals more money. Any of those advantages you get from what is seemingly less material come at a price financially. Now, it's not necessarily less material. Maybe it's higher technology. Whatever the case is, this is a true micro diameter shaft, 4mm shaft from Easton. It's called the ProComp. It comes in in the 300 spine shaft, which is what I need. It comes in at 9.5 grains per inch. So it's the real kind of happy compromise between the 8.5 on the X Impact and the 11.2 on the Day 6 HD. So this allows me to build an arrow that pretty much does everything I want. To this point now, and I've only been shooting them for maybe a month, up to now I've had zero issues with durability. That kind of remains to be seen. That's still kind of a question mark out there for me, because I haven't shot them long enough to really make a determination on that. However, they are shooting extremely well. So the advantages, though, to having a lighter weight shaft are I can build it a little bit longer. This Day 6 shaft I had to cut. Man, I've been running the Valkyrie system, and it has this little, I hope this is focusing. It has this little sleeve is what it's called, and it's a threaded footer, so it fits over the outside of the shaft. It's got threads at the top, and then the Valkyrie system field points and broadheads screw into the actual footer itself and fit down in the shaft. So this collar, I mean, obviously there's a little lip at the bottom edge right here, right? Because here's the end of the shaft. That's where the threads are. And then there's a lip where it stops, obviously, and it takes a step down to the outside diameter of the shaft. So really that lip, that edge, is the limit at which I can have that, of where my rest sits, right? It has to be, otherwise you wind up with that little bump. It can get hung up. I'm just not, not satisfied. I don't want it. I don't want there to be on launch. I don't want there to be a step down and the arrow moves in the rest any more than it has to. So I'm not going to build that into the equation. But so the day 6 shafts, in order to get my weight down, because there's such a heavy shaft per inch, I had to cut it right to that limit, and that was 25¼ inches, which are like crossbow bolts, right? So I can run this Easton ProComp shaft a little bit longer. These are cut at 26½ inches, which doesn't sound like much, but it's still 1¼ inch longer than these ones are. So that gives me a little bit more wiggle room, safety, a margin for error in where my arrow rest sits on the shaft at full draw, and where the broadhead sits over the shelf or in front of my hand, whatever. So 26½ inch shaft. I am still using the Valkyrie system. I have decided to stay with the 200 grain point. So it's a 200 grain field point, a 200 grain Valkyrie Jagger broadhead. Both of them are identical in how they operate, just obviously the tip is different. I'm also retaining these one-stringer arrow wraps, which I'm a huge fan of because they're super lightweight, they're very durable, they've got great colors, 1,000 different designs to choose from, and relatively inexpensive. I'm also staying with Flex Fletch Products FFP 300 vanes. Now, this is about I've experimented with 2½ inch vanes. In this parabolic cut, I've experimented with 2-inch vanes in sort of a blazer cut. I like Flex Fletch products, so I've shot the FFP 250, that's 2½ inch, and the SK 200, which is their Silent Night 2-inch vane, 2 inches long, almost a ½ inch high. It's similar to a blazer, stiffer material. Let me caution you about those. They are noisy. I don't know where the name Silent Night came from. In my experience, they are anything but silent, and that's like a no-go for me. I'm not, regardless of how much weight I may save in the vanes, if it's loud as hell going down range, then I can't use it. I'm not gonna do it. So the 3-inch parabolic cut Flex Fletch FFP 300 vane is the one that I'm using, 6.1 grains per vane, I believe it is. And then, of course, the Easton Deep 6 nocks, which I still think are the best nocks on the market, hands down, period. I don't know how you can improve upon that unless they're able to fit a light in there and not have them cost like $60 to outfit a half dozen of them. Anyway, Easton Deep 6 nocks, one-stringer arrow wrap, Flex Fletch FFP 300 vanes, 26½ inch Easton ProComp shaft in a 300 spine, 9½ grains per inch. The Valkyrie Archery 240 size aluminum sleeve, 21 grains. The Valkyrie Archery 200 grain target point and 200 grain broadhead. The whole thing comes out to 510 grains. Now, that's still that's a decently heavy arrow, at least for us compound guys, right? By contrast, the Day 6 HD 300 shaft that I ran last month during my elk hunt, shorter length shaft overall, how it was cut, same exact components on the back end and on the front end, 543 grains. So I've lost 33 grains, gained 1¼ inch in overall length, and interestingly enough, increased my FOC even though it's a longer shaft. Not by much. This came out at 17% FOC, the Day 6 HD. The Easton ProComp comes out at 18.6 based on Archer's Advantage software. I can take measurements and compute that, and it still comes out relatively close, 18 to 19%, which for me, I don't know, I guess this is highly subjective, but for me, that 18% mark, give or take maybe 1 or 2%, seems like a sweet spot to me. I've heard other guys say 13 to 16%. I talked to Bill at Iron Will. He likes that 13 to 16% range. I believe Aaron Snyder at Kifaro also kind of shoots for somewhere around there, at least with his compound stuff. Personally, so the X Impact shafts from Black Eagle, when I built those up, those were over 20% FOC. I think I was at 22. And yeah, they flew well, but I don't know, man. Maybe I just don't possess either the skill or the measuring equipment or whatever. I don't know. It's probably my own skill. Maybe some tune in the bow. I don't know. I don't notice a huge difference. I don't notice that gigantic leap in accuracy and impact consistency, whatever my groups, when I get up to that 22, 23% FOC, right? Because if you follow that philosophy, theoretically, the higher your FOC, the better your shit should be. I think it's highly subjective. And I found that for me, the compromise, the target number I'm shooting for is 17 or 18%. Now, I'm pleased that the ProComp shafts spec out higher than that, 18.6. That 0.6% doesn't sound like a lot, but if you've messed with FOC, you know that 1%, to get that 1% change, that takes some effort. It's kind of a big deal. Especially when you're adding weight to the ass end of the arrow. Like, that number changes faster adding to the ass end than it is to the front. You need considerably more at the front to equal the change you get by adding weight to the back. Anyway, I'm getting into the weeds. So, real quick about the ProComp shafts too, all right? This is an aluminum carbon shaft. Now, I was a big fan of the Easton ACC back in the day when they still made them. This is an aluminum core laid up with carbon over the top of it. So now, one of the things that I have noticed, and maybe it's just apples and oranges, because if you compare carbon to aluminum, I'm sure the properties of the materials are different. I mean, obviously they are, but from what I'm about to explain, I'm sure they're different. But you know, the Valkyrie points have this tail, this center pin is what it's called, this tail that fits down inside the shaft, right? So only the point is exposed once you install them, but that center pin extends down inside the shaft a good 1.25 inches, maybe, whatever that is. At the very end of the center pin, there are 2 rubber O-rings, and those are there to absorb shock inside the shaft for angled or oblique hits. You know, the point, the broadhead especially, being seen as how it's so long, the point turns into a lever and wants to move inside that shaft because it's just physics, right? So they put these 2 little O-rings on there in order to absorb that shock, to soften the blow, to give it some give so that it's not just breaking as the weak point. It's got a little bit of wiggle room in there for those 2 little O-rings to smash down and absorb some of that shock. Well, when I insert these into the Easton ProComp shafts with that aluminum core, I feel like the point is aligning to the interior dimension of that shaft much more precisely. Now, again, I'm sure there's something, you engineers out there that are all into materials and whatever else, you guys know this way better than I do, and I'm sure I think I'm on the right track with this, but I think it's just the difference between the hardness of aluminum and the relative softness of carbon. I don't know. There's some texture. There has to be some texture to carbon fiber that isn't found in aluminum. So maybe it's just a feel-good thing for me, but I do feel like when I put these things together and I insert that center pin into the shaft, it feels like it is aligning more precisely. It just feels like there are tighter tolerances all the way around with that aluminum core in these Easton ProComps. So from a user standpoint, like results standpoint, these have been the most consistent arrows I've ever shot. I consistently get tighter groups, regardless of where they are on the target. You know, it's like a rifle scope. You got to get a group first to make sure the rifle and the ammunition are performing properly, and then you move that point of impact to match your point of aim, assuming the bow is tuned properly. And working at a bow shop part-time, I think my bow is tuned properly because, again, I'm pretty obsessive about it, and I have the tools at the shop to do that. But these arrows, these shafts have produced groups for me that are pretty spectacular. I'm not going to throw numbers out there. I'm not going to tell you that I'm shooting the center out of a paper plate at 80 yards, because I'm not. Right? And I'm not going to tell you I'm not Tim Gillingham. I'm not Aaron Snyder. I'm not John Dudley. I'm Jeff, and I shoot as well as I can under the circumstances and determine my limits based on that. So, but these things have been shooting really, really well, and I'm very happy. This almost it seems like it's too much vein, a 3-inch vein that's about 4/10 of an inch high. It seems like it may be too much vein, but here's one of the big reasons. You've seen these before on my videos if you've watched them. The Valkyrie broadheads are large. All right, it's about 2.5, 2 3/4 inches long from the base of the broadhead here, of the broadhead, and it's a 1-inch cutting diameter in a 3-blade. There's some surface area on these that isn't present in other broadheads, like the iron wills, that are an even larger cutting diameter, but they are significantly shorter. And I've noticed that, I don't know where it is, at what range it is, but there is a range at which these things seem to be planing downward. And again, this is probably aerodynamics and ballistics, and I'm not going to get into that because I could go on for hours and hours about that. But the bottom line is, I feel that this 3-inch vein that's 4/10 of an inch high is able to steer or overcome the steering effect of those larger broadheads better than a 2-inch vein that's taller. And these things are dead quiet, which I totally dig. So anyhow, that's it for now. If you have any questions, please leave a comment or email me or whatever. Visit the website and take a look. There's a new blog entry up there based on the hunt that I did in September for elk here in Arizona. If you haven't read it at all, take a look, because I think you may find it interesting. I address a topic that isn't addressed directly very often, even though it may be assumed or it goes unspoken. My style is to kind of put it out there and just really say it. So, but with regard to these arrows, I had really good feedback on the one that I did with the Valkyrie build on the day 6 shafts. I think you will be equally pleased with this if I get into if there's a demand for it, or if there's a need for it, and you want to see a little bit more about how I built these, I'd be happy to do that. It's pretty straightforward. It's not rocket science. But I've been very happy with how these have performed. Okay, thanks again, and I appreciate you paying attention and watching and supporting. All right, thank you.